Anna James, a 15-year-old high school sophomore, was no ordinary student. Smart, curious, and unafraid to speak her mind, Anna was known among her classmates for her sharp intellect and her passion for history. She especially loved discussing subjects that related to cultural identity, systemic oppression, and civil rights. With her warm brown skin, piercing eyes, and distinct braids that she wore with pride, she was a powerful presence. Her hairstyle wasn't just fashion, it was a statement of heritage, of roots, and of self-worth, a daily reminder of her strength and resilience. But her self-confidence was about to be tested in the classroom of Mr. Caldwell, her history teacher. Caldwell was a relic of another era, a man in his early 60s with a rigid face, grey hair that matched his personality, and an unyielding demeanor. He'd taught at the school for decades, and over the years his behavior had developed a pattern. He treated his white students with subtle favoritism, often encouraging their participation and acknowledging their viewpoints. But when it came to students like Anna, especially those who were outspoken and who carried themselves with pride, he had a different approach. Caldwell was known for silencing or dismissing black students and other students of color, often under the guise of keeping order or maintaining academic discipline. The class had been assigned a reading on European colonization, a subject that stirred passionate discussions in Anna's mind. She'd researched the brutal histories often glossed over in textbooks, the dark truths hidden behind terms like expansion and progress. When Caldwell opened the floor for discussion, Anna raised her hand. She spoke eloquently, challenging the sanitized portrayal of colonization presented in their textbook. She mentioned the suffering, the exploitation, and the countless lives destroyed. Her voice was steady but full of emotion. As she shared her thoughts with conviction, Caldwell's face tightened. He looked at Anna with a mixture of disdain and irritation. In his view, Anna was overstepping, daring to question the material and, by extension, his authority. His tone was sharp as he interrupted her, saying, "Miss James, perhaps instead of focusing on rewriting history, you should focus on understanding the basics. I'm not sure if your background prepares you for these kinds of academic discussions." The words hit Anna like a slap. There was a stunned silence in the room as her classmates exchanged uneasy glances. Everyone knew what he meant by background, but Caldwell wasn't finished. His gaze swept over her braids, and he added, "And while you're at it, maybe try focusing less on your fashion choices. They seem to be distracting you." Anna's heart pounded in her chest. She felt the heat of embarrassment and anger rise, but she held her head high. This was the first time Caldwell had directly targeted her like this, and she realized that he wasn't going to let up. From that moment, she became his target. Over the next few weeks, Caldwell continued his subtle campaign against Anna. He would call on her to answer questions on topics that the class hadn't covered, putting her on the spot to see if she would stumble. When she presented well-thought-out arguments, he'd scoff and find ways to undermine her. If her arguments were strong, he'd criticize her tone, accusing her of being too emotional. He started grading her assignments more harshly than those of her peers, with barely any constructive feedback. And whenever he saw her with her hair styled in a way that showcased her culture, he'd make snide remarks that her appearance was better suited for a dance club than a classroom. The effect of Caldwell's harassment began to wear on Anna. Her confidence, once solid as a rock, started to waver. She began doubting herself, wondering if her contributions were truly valuable or if she was just causing trouble, as Caldwell liked to imply. Some days she would feel the urge to say something, to defend herself, but the fear of more humiliation kept her silent. The vibrant girl who once took pride in every aspect of her identity now felt small and targeted. Anna wasn't alone in her struggle. Her classmates noticed Caldwell's behavior, and a few even approached her privately to express their support. They told her they admired her strength, that she shouldn't let someone like Caldwell silence her. But it was easier said than done. As the weeks went on, Anna found herself struggling to maintain her resilience. The mental and emotional toll was growing, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could handle it on her own. Finally, one night, Anna sat down with her father, Marcus James. Marcus was a well-respected civil rights lawyer, a man with a powerful presence and a reputation for taking on tough cases. Known for his commitment to justice, he had spent his career defending the rights of those who couldn't defend themselves. Anna had always looked up to him, and she knew that he would understand what she was going through. But when she shared her story, Marcus's reaction surprised her. He listened quietly, his face unreadable. When she finished, he took a long pause before speaking. "Anna," he said, his voice calm but intense, "I know what it's like to face people who think they're better than you because of how you look. I've spent my whole career fighting people like Caldwell. But sometimes standing up isn't as simple as just raising your voice. Sometimes you have to be strategic. You have to be smart." Anna looked at him, confusion and frustration mixing in her eyes. "So, what should I do? Just let him treat me like this?" Marcus shook his head. "No, absolutely not. But if we're going to handle this, we're going to do it right. We're going to gather evidence. We're going to document every incident. And when the time is right, we'll make sure he answers for every single thing he's done." This conversation marked a turning point. Anna started keeping a journal of every comment, every unfair grade, every humiliating remark. She recorded her emotions, detailing the way Caldwell's behavior affected her self-esteem and her desire to learn. This journal became both a source of strength and a tool for accountability. She knew that, eventually, she would have everything she needed to take a stand. The next day, Anna arrived at school with a renewed sense of determination. She had spent the night organizing her thoughts, fueled by the conversation with her father. She no longer felt isolated. She knew her father would support her, and she felt a sense of empowerment just by knowing that there was a plan. But Mr. Caldwell, it seemed, was just getting started. In class that morning, Caldwell made an example of her. They were discussing the Industrial Revolution, and he asked a few students basic questions, prompting easy answers. But when he turned to Anna, he asked her a complex, layered question about the socio-economic impact of colonialism on industrial progress. It was a question that would require a lot of prior knowledge and preparation, far beyond what the class had covered. Anna paused, knowing he was setting her up, but she wasn't going to let him see her falter. She took a deep breath and began to answer, drawing from the extensive research she had done outside of class. Caldwell's eyes narrowed as she spoke. He hadn't expected her to respond so well. But as she finished her explanation, he shook his head and interrupted her. "Miss James, it's clear you're grasping at straws here. This isn't a forum for activism or speculative theories. We're here to study history as it happened, not as you wish it had happened." The class was silent, the tension palpable. A few students exchanged looks of discomfort, but no one dared to speak up. Anna felt the familiar sting of humiliation but forced herself to meet his gaze. She could see the contempt in his eyes, as if he enjoyed putting her in her place. She clenched her fists under the desk, silently vowing not to let him break her. After class, Caldwell asked Anna to stay behind. The other students filed out of the room, shooting her sympathetic glances as they left, but no one lingered. Anna felt her heart rate increase as she found herself alone with him. She was wary, but determined to hold her ground. Caldwell sat on the edge of his desk, folding his arms and looking down at her with a mixture of disdain and condescension. Anna, I want to talk to you about your behavior in class, he began, his voice laced with feigned politeness. It seems to me that you have a habit of disrupting the flow of our discussions with your, shall we say, personal interpretations. Anna knew he was baiting her, but she wasn't about to let him win. Mr. Caldwell, I'm only answering the questions you ask, she replied calmly, trying to keep the edge out of her voice. He tilted his head slightly, studying her. There's a difference between answering a question and hijacking a lesson, Miss James. You may think that your background gives you a unique perspective, but this isn't the place for personal vendettas. History should be taught with objectivity and respect for the facts. Anna felt a surge of anger, but she forced herself to stay composed. I don't have a vendetta, Mr. Caldwell. I just think it's important to talk about all sides of history. Ah, all sides, he repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. You see, that's the problem, Anna. Not every student here wants to hear your all sides version of events. Some of us are here to learn about progress and achievement, not to be reminded of every ugly chapter that may or may not be relevant. She felt her jaw tighten. He was trying to make her feel small, to make her question her place in the classroom. But she wasn't going to back down. I think understanding history includes acknowledging everything, even if it's uncomfortable, she replied quietly. Caldwell's face twisted in annoyance. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper, his tone menacing. Let me be clear, Miss James. You might think you're some kind of intellectual, but all I see is a disruptive influence. If you don't start behaving like a student instead of some self-appointed activist, there will be consequences. Anna's heart was pounding, but she refused to show any sign of fear. She held his gaze, her voice steady. I understand, Mr. Caldwell. I'll be sure to write down everything that happens in your class. Caldwell straightened, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before he masked it with a smirk. Good. It's about time you learned your place. She left the classroom, her hands shaking, but her mind resolute. The interaction had only strengthened her resolve to document everything. Caldwell had made his intentions clear, and she knew now that this was more than just an academic dispute. It was a battle over her right to be seen and heard. Over the next few weeks, Caldwell's attacks grew more frequent and more personal. He would call on Anna to answer questions that were irrelevant to the day's lesson, questions designed to embarrass her or showcase her lack of knowledge. When she responded accurately, he would nitpick her phrasing, dismissing her points with condescending remarks like, "Perhaps you should focus less on your opinions and more on actual facts, Miss James." But the harassment didn't stop at academics. Caldwell began making offhand comments about her appearance, veiled insults that targeted her braids and sense of style. He'd say things like, "Some students seem to think school is a fashion show. Maybe if they put as much effort into their studies as they did their hair, they'd actually learn something." His eyes would linger on her hair, a look of disdain in his gaze, as if her very presence offended him. Anna felt her confidence eroding. Each day in Caldwell's class became an exercise in endurance, a test of how much she could take without breaking. She'd go home exhausted, her mind racing with his words, questioning herself, wondering if she really was just causing trouble as he implied. But then she'd remember her father's advice, and she'd pick up her journal, recording each interaction in painstaking detail. One afternoon, things escalated even further. Caldwell assigned a major project and announced that the class would be divided into pairs. When Anna was paired with a boy named Jake, who was known to be one of Caldwell's favorites, she thought perhaps she might finally get a chance to prove herself through teamwork. But Caldwell's bias reared its head again. During the project, he kept publicly praising Jake's contributions, often interrupting Anna when she tried to explain her own ideas. At one point, he outright dismissed her input, saying, Let's leave the heavy lifting to someone who understands the material." Jake looked uncomfortable, but he didn't protest, and Anna felt the sting of being disregarded once again. When she got her grade for the project, she was shocked to see a low mark, with comments that criticized her lack of participation and limited understanding of the subject. Jake received a high grade with glowing praise, even though they had worked on the project together. Anna realized that no matter how hard she worked, Caldwell would continue finding ways to undermine her. That evening, Anna broke down in tears, overwhelmed by the frustration and helplessness she felt. She had been holding everything in for so long, trying to stay strong, but the weight of it all was too much. She called her father, her voice trembling as she recounted the latest incident. Marcus listened, his voice calm and steady, but she could sense the anger simmering beneath his words. "This has gone on long enough. Anna," he said, his tone firm. "You've done your part. Now it's my turn." Anna felt a spark of hope, a sense of relief knowing that her father was stepping in. But she also felt a pang of guilt, wondering if she was somehow to blame for everything that had happened. Marcus reassured her, his voice filled with warmth. "None of this is your fault. Remember that. Caldwell is the one who crossed the line, and he's going to answer for it." As she hung up the phone, Anna felt a newfound strength. She didn't know exactly what her father planned to do, but she trusted him completely. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to feel hopeful, to believe that justice was within reach. That night, Marcus sat down at his desk, methodically organizing the documentation Anna had collected, reviewing the notes he'd made from their conversations. This wasn't just about Anna, it was about holding someone accountable for abusing their power. He was determined to take action, and he knew just how to start. The following morning, Anna walked into Mr. Caldwell's classroom with a new sense of calm. She knew her father was now involved, that he was preparing to take action, and that she didn't have to shoulder this battle alone. But as she took her seat and glanced around the classroom, she caught sight of Caldwell's steely gaze fixed on her. It was clear he had no intention of letting up. In fact, it seemed he was ready to make things even more difficult. Class started, and Caldwell immediately launched into a lecture. He moved through the material quickly, barely pausing to explain the more complex points, leaving students scrambling to keep up with their notes. Then, without warning, he stopped mid-sentence and directed a question toward Anna, one that was not only unrelated to the day's topic but was also something they hadn't covered at all. It was a question about obscure historical events and sources that weren't even in their textbooks. "Miss James," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "perhaps you can enlighten us with your insights on the economic policies of 17th century Portugal." Anna blinked, taken aback by the abruptness of the question. She felt a wave of anxiety but reminded herself to stay calm. "I'm sorry, Mr. Caldwell, but that topic wasn't part of our assigned reading," she responded, keeping her tone steady. Caldwell's mouth twisted into a smirk. "I see. So you're saying you're unprepared. I expected more from someone who claims to be so passionate about history." She felt the heat of humiliation but forced herself to maintain her composure. "I'm well prepared for the material we were assigned," so she replied quietly. The class was silent, the tension thick. Some students looked at her with pity, others with a kind of nervous sympathy. Caldwell nodded slowly, as if savoring the moment. "Well, maybe if you spent less time focusing on distractions such as certain fashionable hairstyles, you'd be better prepared for real academic work." Anna's jaw clenched, but she remained silent, refusing to let him see the impact his words were having. She knew that Caldwell was trying to push her to a breaking point, to provoke her into lashing out so he could label her as disruptive or overly emotional. And as much as she wanted to tell him exactly what she thought of him, she knew she couldn't afford to give him that satisfaction. After class, Caldwell once again asked her to stay behind. Anna's heart sank, but she knew she had to face him. As the last student filed out, she stood by her desk, watching him as he closed the door and approached her, his face set in that familiar mask of disdain. "Miss James," he began, folding his arms, "I think it's time we have a very candid conversation about your behavior in my class." She met his gaze, doing her best to appear calm. "I haven't disrupted your class, Mr. Caldwell. I've only answered the questions you asked." "Don't be clever with me," he snapped. "It's not just about answering questions. It's about the attitude with which you present yourself. You carry yourself as if you're above the rules, as if you're entitled to special treatment because of, well, let's just say, your background, and leave it at that." Anna felt a surge of anger, but she held it back. "I don't expect any special treatment, Mr. Caldwell. I just want to be treated fairly." Caldwell sneered. "Fairly? Miss James, you think this is unfair? I'm simply holding you to the same standard as everyone else. It's not my fault if you're unable to meet it." His words hit her like a slap. She could feel tears stinging the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away, refusing to show weakness in front of him. "Now," he continued, his voice lowering to a more menacing tone, "I've noticed that you take an awful lot of pride in your appearance, particularly your elaborate hairstyle. It's distracting, to say the least. A student of your situation should focus on her studies rather than indulging in such vanity." Anna's hand instinctively reached up to touch one of her braids, and she felt a mix of anger and shame. She realized what he was doing. He was trying to make her feel small, to strip away her confidence, one piece at a time. But she wouldn't let him. She straightened her back, meeting his gaze with a defiance she hadn't shown before. "If there's nothing else, Mr. Caldwell, I'd like to leave now," she said firmly, her voice steady. But Caldwell wasn't finished. He took a step closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. "Miss James, I think it's time you learned a lesson about humility." With that, he reached over to his desk, picked up a pair of scissors, and before she could react, he grabbed a handful of her braids and, with a swift snip, cut them off. Anna gasped, her hand flying to the back of her head where her hair had been. She felt a mixture of shock, horror, and violation. Her braids, those beautiful, carefully styled braids that represented so much of who she was, lay on the floor, severed and discarded like they were nothing. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. Caldwell's expression was cold, almost satisfied, as if he had just performed some necessary act of discipline. "There," he said, dropping the scissors back onto his desk. "Perhaps now you'll be able to focus more on your studies." Anna stumbled backward, her mind reeling. She couldn't speak, the words wouldn't come. All she could feel was a deep, aching sense of humiliation and rage. Without another word, she turned and fled from the room, the sound of his cold laughter echoing in her ears. She ran to the bathroom, locking herself in a stall as tears streamed down her face. She felt violated, broken, as if something precious had been taken from her. She touched the uneven ends of her hair, the spots where her braids had been ruthlessly cut, and felt a surge of anger so intense it made her whole body shake. When she finally composed herself enough to leave the bathroom, she avoided looking at anyone, hurrying through the hallways with her head down. She just wanted to go home, to escape the nightmare that her school had become. As soon as she got home, she ran into her father's arms, finally letting herself cry. She told him everything, her words tumbling out in between sobs as she recounted every cruel word, every humiliating comment, and finally, the horror of what Caldwell had done. Marcus held her, his face a mask of fury as he listened. He hadn't thought Caldwell would go this far, hadn't realized the depth of his cruelty. But now, as he held his sobbing daughter, he knew that this was no longer just about a teacher with a grudge. This was a deliberate, violent act of degradation, a violation of his daughter's dignity and identity. When Anna had cried herself out, Marcus looked her in the eyes, his own filled with a fierce, unyielding resolve. "Anna, you're not going back to that man's class, and I promise you, he's going to pay for what he did." He spent the next few hours documenting every detail of what had happened, taking photos of Anna's hair, recording her testimony, and reaching out to several contacts who he knew would be interested in hearing this story. Marcus wasn't just planning to remove Caldwell from his position, he was going to make sure that everyone knew what kind of man he was. The next day, he visited the school and requested a meeting with the principal. Anna was nervous, her stomach twisted in knots as she waited outside the office, but Marcus was calm and composed, his face a mask of professionalism. He had been in this position before, facing down people in positions of power, and he knew how to handle it. Inside the principal's office, he laid out his case, showing the principal the evidence he had gathered, detailing every instance of Caldwell's harassment, every insult, and finally, the assault that had crossed the line. The principal listened, her face growing pale as she realized the gravity of the situation. "This is unacceptable," she said finally, her voice shaking slightly. "I assure you, Mr. James, we'll conduct a full investigation, and if what you're saying is true, Mr. Caldwell will face consequences." But Marcus wasn't satisfied with vague promises. He pressed her, insisting on concrete actions, demanding that Caldwell be suspended immediately and that the school issue an apology to his daughter. The principal agreed reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable with the intensity of his demands, but she knew she had no choice. When Marcus left the office, he knew that the fight was far from over. Caldwell might face disciplinary actions, but that wasn't enough. He wanted justice, not just for Anna but for every student who had ever been mistreated by this man, and he knew exactly how to get it. Over the next few days, he began contacting former students who had experienced similar treatment at Caldwell's hands. Some were hesitant to speak up, but others, emboldened by Anna's story, agreed to share their experiences. Marcus gathered their testimonies, building a case that would be impossible to ignore. He also reached out to a few local journalists, knowing that once the story went public, the school would have no choice but to act decisively. He didn't care about the fallout or the reputational damage. His only goal was to ensure that no other student would have to suffer the way Anna had. Anna watched as her father worked tirelessly, feeling a sense of awe and gratitude. She knew that he was fighting for her, standing up against a system that had failed her. And for the first time since this nightmare began, she felt a glimmer of hope. The day after Marcus's meeting with the principal, the school issued a notice that Mr. Caldwell had been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. The news spread through the school like wildfire, and students buzzed with whispers about what had happened. Some of Anna's classmates reached out to her, offering their support, while others seemed afraid to get involved. It was surreal for Anna to see the impact her father's actions were having on the school. She felt both relieved and anxious. The man who had humiliated her was finally facing consequences, but she knew this was only the beginning. That evening, Marcus gathered the family around the dinner table. He looked at Anna, his gaze filled with determination and warmth. "Anna, I want you to understand something very important," he said. "What Mr. Caldwell did to you wasn't just wrong, it was an abuse of power, a violation of your dignity, and I won't stop until he's held accountable, not just by the school, but by the world. Are you ready for what comes next?" Anna hesitated, feeling a knot of anxiety in her stomach. She wasn't sure she wanted to become the center of attention, to have her story dissected by strangers and judged by people who might not understand. But as she looked into her father's eyes, she saw his unwavering support and realized that this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about making sure no one else had to go through what she did. "I'm ready, Dad," she replied, her voice steady but quiet. "I trust you." Marcus smiled and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Good. We're going to do this together." Over the next few days, Marcus intensified his efforts. He reached out to former students who had been mistreated by Caldwell, gathering testimonies that painted a damning picture of a man who had terrorized students for years, hiding behind his authority. Some former students spoke of subtle insults and veiled comments, while others described outright discrimination and public humiliation. Each story added weight to the case Marcus was building. Marcus also contacted local journalists, knowing that public exposure would pressure the school into taking more decisive action. One of the journalists, a sharp investigative reporter named Rachel Lee, was particularly interested in the story. She had covered cases of educational misconduct before and saw this as an opportunity to expose the toxic behavior that had been allowed to fester within the school system. She agreed to meet with Marcus to discuss the details. The night before the meeting with Rachel, Marcus sat down with Anna in the living room. "Anna, tomorrow you're going to meet Rachel Lee. She's a journalist who's going to help us get this story out to the public. But remember, once this goes out, people are going to talk. Some will support you, but others, well, they might not. They might accuse you of exaggerating, or say you're trying to ruin a teacher's life." Anna swallowed hard, feeling a mix of fear and determination. "I understand, Dad, but I'm not lying, and if people don't believe me, well, that's on them." Marcus nodded, pride in his eyes. "Exactly. You have the truth on your side, Anna. Never forget that." The next day, they met Rachel at a small cafe near Marcus's office. Rachel was a no-nonsense woman in her late 30s, with a quick mind and a deep sense of justice. She listened intently as Anna recounted her story, her face growing more serious with each detail. "Anna," Rachel said after a long pause, "what happened to you is horrifying. I can't imagine what it took to come forward with this, but I want you to know that you're doing something incredibly brave. Not just for yourself, but for other students who might be suffering in silence." Anna felt a surge of gratitude. Rachel's words reassured her that she was doing the right thing, even if it felt terrifying. Over the following week, Rachel began to piece together the story, conducting interviews with former students and parents who had witnessed or experienced Caldwell's abusive behavior. As Rachel's investigation progressed, the scope of Caldwell's misconduct became clear. He hadn't just targeted Anna, he had spent years preying on students who didn't fit his rigid ideals. Students of color, students from different socioeconomic backgrounds, even students with disabilities all had stories to tell. Meanwhile, Anna tried to keep a low profile at school, but it was difficult to escape the whispers. Some students supported her openly, while others kept their distance, wary of the attention she was drawing. A few teachers offered words of encouragement, but others avoided her, uncomfortable with the controversy surrounding her case. She could feel the weight of their judgment, a reminder that taking a stand often meant standing alone. Then, one afternoon, as Anna was leaving school, she found herself face to face with Mr. Caldwell in the parking lot. He was waiting by his car, his expression dark and menacing. For a brief moment, Anna considered turning around and walking back inside, but she squared her shoulders, refusing to show fear. Caldwell smirked as she approached. "You think you've won, don't you, Miss James?" he sneered, his voice low and venomous. "You think you can destroy me with your lies and your whining." Anna felt her pulse quicken, but she forced herself to stay calm. "They're not lies, Mr. Caldwell. And this isn't over." He laughed. a cold, bitter sound. You're nothing but a spoiled little girl playing at being a victim. But let me tell you something, Anna, you're going to regret this. People like you always do. With that, he got into his car and drove off, leaving Anna standing in the parking lot, shaken but resolute. She knew then that Caldwell wasn't just cruel, he was dangerous. He would do anything to protect himself, even if it meant trying to intimidate her. But she also knew that he had shown her exactly who he was, and she was more determined than ever to make sure he faced the consequences. When she told Marcus about the encounter, he reacted with a quiet fury. He promised her that Caldwell's threats would only strengthen their case, that this was just one more piece of evidence proving the kind of person he was. And he was right. Rachel included Caldwell's menacing behavior in her story, making it clear that his actions extended beyond the classroom. As the story began to take shape, Rachel arranged for an interview with a local news station. She wanted Anna and Marcus to have a platform to share their side of the story, to put a human face to the experiences she had documented. At first, Anna was nervous, but her father reassured her. "You're telling the truth, Anna," he reminded her. "All you have to do is be yourself." On the day of the interview, Anna sat beside her father in the studio, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The interviewer was respectful and sympathetic, asking questions that allowed Anna to tell her story without feeling pressured. She spoke about the fear, the humiliation, the sense of betrayal she had felt. She described the moment Caldwell had cut her hair, the way it had made her feel powerless and violated. Marcus spoke as well, his voice steady and powerful as he described the impact of Caldwell's actions not just on his daughter, but on every student who had ever suffered in silence. "This isn't just about one teacher," he said, looking directly into the camera. "It's about a culture that allows people like him to thrive, that ignores the voices of students who are brave enough to speak up. We're here to change that." The interview aired that evening, and the response was immediate. Social media exploded with support for Anna, with messages pouring in from people who had experienced similar injustices. Former students of Caldwell reached out, sharing their own stories and thanking Anna for her courage. The story went viral, catching the attention of larger news outlets, and soon Anna's face was everywhere. But with the support came criticism as well. Some people accused her of exaggerating, of trying to ruin a man's life over minor incidents. Others claimed she was too sensitive or seeking attention. Anna tried not to let it affect her, but it was hard not to feel the sting of their words. She reminded herself that she was standing up for what was right, that her father believed in her, and that she wasn't alone. Meanwhile, the school was scrambling to manage the fallout. The principal issued a statement saying that they were conducting a thorough investigation and were committed to upholding the values of respect and inclusion. But Marcus knew this was just damage control, an attempt to save face in the midst of a growing scandal. Rachel's article was published a few days later, a comprehensive piece that documented Caldwell's history of abuse and the school's failure to address it. The article was shared widely, sparking a conversation about the importance of accountability in education. It wasn't just about Caldwell anymore, it was about every teacher who used their authority to belittle and control, every school that turned a blind eye to injustice. The impact was profound. Other students and families began coming forward, sharing their own stories of mistreatment at the hands of teachers and administrators who had abused their power. It was as if Anna's story had opened a floodgate, and people were no longer willing to stay silent. As the days went by, Anna found herself transformed. She was no longer the frightened girl who had sat in Caldwell's classroom, afraid to speak up. She had become a symbol of resilience, a voice for those who had been silenced. And while she still felt the weight of the battle she was fighting, she knew it was a fight worth waging. One evening, As she and her father were sitting together, Marcus looked at her with a proud smile. "Anna, I want you to know how proud I am of you," he said, his voice filled with warmth. "You've shown more strength than most adults ever could." Anna smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "Thanks, Dad. I couldn't have done it without you." Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder. "We did this together, and whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Anna nodded, feeling a newfound sense of purpose. She didn't know what the future held, but she was ready to face it, to keep fighting for justice and for the right to be heard. As the fallout from Rachel's article spread, Mr. Caldwell's situation grew more precarious by the day. The school's investigation into his behavior was underway, and parents were demanding answers. His reputation was in tatters, and the community was beginning to view him with suspicion and disdain. But Caldwell wasn't about to go down quietly. Desperate to salvage what remained of his career, he decided to fight back, no matter the cost. One morning, as Anna arrived at school, she noticed whispers and sidelong glances directed her way. It wasn't unusual since the story had broken, but today the stares seemed sharper, almost hostile. She could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on her, making her footsteps feel heavy as she walked through the halls. In her first class, one of her classmates, a boy named Tom, who had always been a bit of a troublemaker, leaned over and sneered, "You think you're some kind of hero, don't you? Just because you got a teacher suspended." Anna felt a pang of discomfort, but kept her expression neutral. She didn't want to give Tom the satisfaction of knowing his words affected her. She'd been prepared for criticism, had even steeled herself against it, but hearing it from a peer still stung. "Just mind your own business, Tom," she replied coolly, refusing to engage further. But Tom didn't back down. He continued his mocking, loud enough for other students to hear. "You ruined a man's career just because you couldn't handle a little tough love. Everyone's saying you're just playing the victim." Anna clenched her jaw, anger bubbling beneath her calm facade. But she took a deep breath, determined not to let him bait her into an argument. She'd already faced enough public scrutiny, she didn't need to add classroom disruption to her list of challenges. As the day went on, the comments continued. Some students sneered or whispered as she passed, while others openly accused her of exaggerating Caldwell's actions. A few even hinted that she had misinterpreted his strict teaching style as abuse because she couldn't handle the pressure. It was clear to Anna that Caldwell's supporters, however few, were determined to defend him, regardless of the evidence. But that afternoon, things escalated in a way she hadn't anticipated. As she left school, Anna found her locker vandalized. Scrawled in large, black marker across the door were the words "liar, troublemaker" and "crybaby." Her heart sank as she looked at the cruel words, each one feeling like a fresh wound. A small group of students stood nearby, watching her reaction with smirks on their faces, as if they were proud of their handiwork. Anna took a shaky breath, fighting back tears. She'd known that standing up to Caldwell would be hard, that she'd face resistance. But she hadn't expected her own peers to turn on her with such cruelty. She felt alone, isolated, as if the entire school had turned its back on her. But later that evening, when she told her father what had happened, Marcus's reaction was immediate and fierce. "This is unacceptable," he said, his voice thick with anger. "You've done nothing wrong, Anna. This school has failed to protect you, and they're going to answer for it." The next day, Marcus demanded another meeting with the principal. This time, his tone was far less diplomatic. "You assured me that this investigation would be handled professionally, that my daughter's safety would be your priority," he said, his voice cold and sharp. "But instead, she's been subjected to harassment and bullying by her peers, right under your nose." The principal shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly caught off guard by Marcus's intensity. Mr. James, we're doing everything we can to ensure a safe environment for Anna, but these incidents, they're difficult to control. Students can be cruel, especially when emotions are high. Marcus leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. Then control them. My daughter shouldn't have to walk through these halls fearing retaliation. If the school can't provide her with a safe environment, I'll take this matter to the district, the school board, whoever I need to. And if that doesn't work, I'll take it to court. The principal's face paled, and she nodded, clearly realizing the seriousness of his threat. We'll increase security measures, Mr. James. I'll speak to the staff about monitoring student behavior more closely, and we'll issue a statement reminding students of the consequences for harassment. With that assurance, Marcus left, but Anna could see the tension etched across his face. He was doing everything he could to protect her, but she knew this fight was wearing on him too. Over the next few days, the atmosphere at school grew even more tense. Caldwell, desperate to regain his standing, had begun spreading rumors through his own network, reaching out to certain parents and stirring up resentment. He painted himself as the victim of a vindictive campaign, claiming that Anna and her father had overreacted and misinterpreted his firm but fair teaching style. He insisted that he had only ever pushed Anna to help her succeed, and that his actions had been twisted into something malicious. The rumors spread quickly, finding their way into the homes of students who were only too eager to believe Caldwell's version of events. A group of parents even started a petition, calling for Caldwell's reinstatement and accusing Marcus and Anna of defaming an honorable educator. To them, Caldwell's history of strict discipline was an asset, a sign of his dedication to his students' success. They saw Marcus as an outsider, a man who had come into their community with an agenda, stirring up trouble and smearing a respected teacher's reputation. One evening, Marcus received an anonymous letter in the mail. Inside was a single, typed sheet with the words, "You're ruining a good man's life. Stop now, or we'll make you regret it." There was no return address, no name, just the veiled threat. Marcus's jaw clenched as he read the words, his anger boiling over. But he kept the letter, documenting it as yet another piece of evidence of the lengths to which Caldwell's supporters were willing to go to silence him and Anna. That weekend, things took an even darker turn. Marcus received a call from Rachel Lee, the journalist who had covered Anna's story. She sounded unsettled, almost nervous. "Marcus, I just got a message from one of my sources. Apparently, Caldwell's supporters are planning a rally outside the school on Monday morning. They're calling it a Stand Up for Educators protest. But we both know what it's really about. They're trying to intimidate Anna and anyone else who speaks out against him." Marcus's face hardened as he listened, a storm brewing in his eyes. "They want to intimidate my daughter? Fine. Let them come. But we won't be backing down." On Monday morning, Anna and Marcus arrived at the school to find a small crowd of Caldwell's supporters gathered outside, holding signs that read, "Reinstate Mr. Caldwell, stop the lies and respect our teachers." The protesters glared at Anna as she walked past, some of them muttering under their breath. She could feel their hostility like a physical weight pressing down on her, but she kept her head high, refusing to let them see her fear. Inside the school, Anna could hear whispers from students who had seen the rally. Some of them seemed supportive, while others were indifferent or even sympathetic to the protesters. She felt like a stranger in her own school, caught in the middle of a storm that she had never asked for but couldn't escape. At lunch, a group of girls approached her, their faces twisted with contempt. "I hope you're happy," one of them sneered. "You're tearing this school apart just because you couldn't handle a little criticism." Anna clenched her fists, fighting the urge to respond. She knew that anything she said would only make things worse, so she forced herself to stay silent, to let their words wash over her without reacting. But as the day went on, the pressure built inside her, a simmering frustration and helplessness that threatened to boil over. By the time she got home, she was on the verge of tears, and she threw herself into her father's arms, finally letting the emotions she'd been holding back pour out. "Dad, I don't know how much more of this I can take," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. "They're treating me like I'm the one who did something wrong, like I'm the villain in all of this." Marcus held her tightly, his voice calm and steady as he reassured her. "Anna, listen to me. None of this is your fault. You stood up for yourself, for what's right. That takes courage, and not everyone has it. But I do. And I promise you, we're going to get through this together." He stroked her hair, his own resolve hardening with each passing second. He knew that Caldwell's supporters wouldn't stop until they were forced to. If they wanted to play dirty, he was ready to play too, but on his own terms. That night, Marcus made several calls, reaching out to his contacts in the legal and civil rights communities. He wasn't going to let these people bully his daughter or intimidate her into silence. He arranged for security to escort Anna to and from school, ensuring that she would be safe no matter what. Then he called Rachel Lee again, filling her in on the latest developments. Rachel was appalled by the lengths to which Caldwell's supporters were willing to go. She agreed to write a follow-up article, exposing the harassment Anna was facing and the school's failure to protect her from retaliation. The article was published the following day, and it hit the community hard. Rachel detailed the threats, the vandalism, the anonymous letter, and the rally outside the school, painting a picture of a community that was more concerned with protecting an abusive teacher than with standing up for a vulnerable student. She even included interviews with former students who had been intimidated by Caldwell's supporters when they'd tried to come forward with their own stories. The backlash was swift and fierce. Parents who had initially supported Caldwell found themselves questioning their allegiance as they saw the lengths to which his supporters were willing to go. Community members who had stayed silent began speaking out, condemning the harassment and demanding accountability. And Caldwell, once a respected figure, now found himself increasingly isolated, his support dwindling as people realized the true nature of his actions. But Marcus knew that the battle wasn't over. Caldwell was a cornered animal now, and he was more dangerous than ever. The tension reached a boiling point in the community after Rachel's follow-up article went live. The pressure on the school administration had become unbearable. Parents demanded transparency, and the district superintendent called an emergency meeting to address the growing scandal. Caldwell's supporters, though fewer in number, were louder and angrier than ever. They insisted he was the victim of a vindictive campaign by Marcus and Anna, who they claimed had overreacted and destroyed a good man's life over a misunderstanding. That Monday morning, Marcus received a call from Rachel. Her tone was urgent, even a bit uneasy. "Marcus, one of my sources told me Caldwell's supporters are planning a rally inside the school itself. They're going to confront Anna in the middle of the day, make a scene in front of everyone. I've never seen anything like this." Marcus clenched his jaw, fury and concern flashing in his eyes. "They think they can intimidate my daughter into silence, but they're about to find out what happens when they cross that line." He was in the car before he'd even finished his sentence, racing toward the school. He called the principal, warning her of the situation, demanding that she protect his daughter from the mob. But he knew he couldn't rely on them to act quickly enough. He needed to be there himself. When he arrived, the scene was worse than he'd expected. Inside the school lobby, a crowd had gathered: parents, students, and even a few teachers, most of them Caldwell's supporters. They held signs with phrases like "Stop the lies" and "Reinstate Mr. Caldwell." At the front of the crowd, a man was loudly addressing the group, his voice full of righteous anger as he condemned Anna and Marcus by name. Are we going to let one family's lies destroy the career of a beloved teacher? The man shouted, waving a sign in the air. Are we going to let this school bow to the whims of people who don't even respect our community? The crowd roared in agreement, their voices echoing through the hallways. Students peered out from classroom doors, watching the spectacle unfold with a mixture of shock and disbelief. Anna, who had been in her classroom, heard the commotion and felt a chill run down her spine. She knew they were here because of her, but she never could have anticipated this level of hatred. Marcus pushed his way through the crowd, his face set with fierce determination. He spotted Anna standing at the door of her classroom, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. He made his way to her side, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's okay, Anna. I'm here. They're not going to hurt you." At that moment, the man leading the rally spotted Marcus and Anna. His eyes narrowed, and he pointed a finger at them, his voice dripping with contempt. "There they are, the liars, the agitators. They've torn apart this community, ruined a good man's life, all because they couldn't handle a little discipline." The crowd surged forward, voices rising in a cacophony of anger. Marcus stood his ground, shielding Anna with his body as he looked directly at the man leading the rally. "You're angry because someone finally had the courage to expose the truth. Caldwell is no good man. He's a bully who's abused his power for years. And if you support him, then you're just as guilty as he is." The room fell silent for a moment as his words cut through the noise. But the silence didn't last. The crowd erupted again, their anger undiminished. The principal and several teachers tried to intervene, stepping between Marcus and the mob, but the tension was palpable. Then, suddenly, the doors of the school swung open, and a group of police officers walked in. Marcus had anticipated this possibility and had contacted local authorities on his way to the school, warning them that there could be a disturbance. The lead officer stepped forward, his voice firm as he addressed the crowd. "This is a school, not a protest site. If you're here to support your community, do it peacefully. Anyone engaging in harassment or making threats will be removed immediately." The crowd hesitated, some grumbling under their breath, but the presence of law enforcement was enough to cool the immediate threat. Slowly, the crowd began to disperse, casting hostile glances at Anna and Marcus as they left. Marcus turned to Anna, his face softening. "Are you okay?" Anna nodded, though her expression was a mixture of relief and lingering fear. I didn't expect this. I knew people didn't believe me, but this." Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder, his gaze unwavering. "You've done the right thing, Anna. This is the price of standing up for the truth, but you're not alone. I won't let anyone intimidate you. We're in this together." The principal, who had witnessed the entire scene, approached them, her face pale and anxious. "Mr. James, Anna. I want to apologize. We never anticipated things would escalate like this. We've failed to protect Anna, and we're taking steps to make sure this never happens again." But Marcus wasn't finished. An apology isn't enough. This school allowed Caldwell's behavior to go unchecked for years, and now my daughter is paying the price. I'm taking this to the school board, and I expect real action to be taken. This ends now." The principal nodded, her expression one of defeat. She knew that Marcus's words were more than a threat, they were a promise. She assured him that Caldwell would not be returning and that disciplinary actions would be enforced against anyone who had participated in the mob. As Marcus and Anna left the school, a heavy silence hung between them. They knew that the hardest part was over, but the scars of what had happened would linger. Anna had been forced to confront hatred and prejudice head-on, and though she had stood strong, the experience had left her shaken. That evening, Marcus received a call from a lawyer representing Caldwell. The lawyer's tone was icy, professional but full of veiled threats. "Mr. James, I'm calling to inform you that Mr. Caldwell is considering a defamation suit against you and your daughter. He believes that his reputation has been unfairly destroyed, and he's prepared to pursue legal action unless you retract your statements." Marcus listened quietly, a smirk forming on his face. "You tell Mr. Caldwell that I have documented evidence, eyewitness accounts, and a community full of people who know exactly what kind of man he is. If he wants to take this to court, I'll be more than happy to oblige. In fact, I think it's about time the truth was put on the record." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before the lawyer cleared his throat. "I see. Well, I'll pass your message along, Mr. James." Marcus hung up, feeling a rush of satisfaction. Caldwell was desperate, clutching at any straw he could find to save himself, but Marcus wasn't about to back down. He had come too far to let fear or intimidation derail his fight for justice. The next day, the school board held an emergency meeting, and Marcus was invited to speak. He stood before the board, recounting Anna's story, presenting evidence of Caldwell's abusive behavior and the school's failure to protect his daughter. His voice was steady and filled with conviction as he described the pain and humiliation Anna had endured. "This isn't just about one teacher," he said, his gaze sweeping across the board members. "It's about a culture that tolerates and even enables this kind of abuse. It's about a system that fails our children by allowing predators like Caldwell to thrive without consequence. I'm here to demand accountability, not just for my daughter, but for every student who's ever been made to feel powerless, belittled, or silenced." The board listened in stunned silence, unable to deny the truth of his words. They knew that Marcus had the support of the community, that his story had reached beyond the school walls and touched a nerve with people who were tired of seeing injustice swept under the rug. After a lengthy deliberation, the board announced that Mr. Caldwell would be permanently removed from his teaching position and that the school would implement new policies to prevent similar incidents in the future. They offered a public apology to Anna, acknowledging the harm she had suffered and pledging to make changes that would protect other students. That night, as they returned home, Anna felt a sense of closure. She had faced her worst fears, endured harassment and isolation, but in the end, justice had been served. Her father had stood by her side through it all, refusing to let her be silenced, and together they had made a difference. Marcus hugged her tightly, pride and love shining in his eyes. "You're stronger than you know, Anna. This is only the beginning. Remember that you have a voice, and it matters. You stood up for yourself, for the truth, and no one can ever take that away from you." As she lay in bed that night, Anna felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in weeks. The journey had been painful, but she had emerged stronger, more resilient. She knew that the scars would fade, but the lessons she'd learned, the power of her voice, the strength of standing up for herself, would stay with her forever. In the weeks that followed, life at school began to settle into a new normal. With Caldwell officially dismissed, the hostility that had once filled the hallways slowly dissipated. Some students who had initially sided with him offered Anna quiet nods of respect or murmured apologies, clearly rethinking their stance now that the truth was undeniable. The rally, the threats, and Caldwell's forced removal had been a turning point, not only for Anna but for the entire school community. For Anna, returning to her classes felt strange at first. She had faced the worst of her fears: public humiliation, isolation, and even danger, but somehow she had come out on the other side stronger. Walking down the hall, she no longer felt the weight of judgment or fear. Instead, she felt a sense of resilience she hadn't known she was capable of. One afternoon, the principal called Anna and Marcus into her office for a meeting. She looked at them with a mixture of humility and gratitude. "Anna, Mr. James. She began, "I owe you both an apology. I failed to protect you, Anna, and I failed to take action when it mattered most. This school has learned a painful lesson because of you, and I want you to know that we are committed to change." Anna listened, feeling a mix of relief and satisfaction. She had waited so long to hear those words and acknowledgement, at last, of the pain she'd endured and the courage it had taken to stand up for herself. The principal continued, outlining new measures the school was implementing to protect students and promote accountability. They were introducing a zero-tolerance policy for bullying and discrimination, providing teachers and staff with sensitivity training, and creating a confidential system for students to report harassment. It wasn't everything, but it was a start, a sign that her experience hadn't been in vain. Before they left, the principal turned to Anna. "Thank you, Anna. Because of your courage, this school will be a safer place. And if you ever need anything, my door is open." As they left the principal's office, Marcus wrapped an arm around Anna's shoulders, pride evident in his eyes. "You did this, Anna. You created real change. Never forget that." The following weekend, Marcus organized a small gathering at their home with friends, family, and a few of Anna's close classmates who had supported her throughout the ordeal. Rachel Lee, the journalist who had been instrumental in sharing Anna's story, was also there, eager to see how she was doing. In the warmth of her home, surrounded by people who believed in her, Anna felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. The atmosphere was filled with laughter, conversation, and support. Everyone was there to celebrate Anna's resilience and the victory she had achieved, not just against Caldwell, but against a system that had failed her and so many others. Toward the end of the evening, Rachel raised a toast, her voice filled with admiration. "To Anna, a young woman who showed more courage than many adults ever will. You've inspired all of us, Anna. May this be just the beginning of many victories in your life." Anna felt her cheeks flush as everyone raised their glasses, clinking them in her honor. She was grateful, humbled, and for the first time in a long while, truly happy. She knew that she still had healing to do, that the scars from her experience would take time to fade, but tonight she allowed herself to bask in the warmth of her friends and family. Later, when most of the guests had left, Anna and Marcus sat together on the porch, enjoying the quiet night air. Marcus looked at her, his eyes filled with pride and a hint of emotion. "Anna, I can't tell you how proud I am of you. You've shown a strength I never could have imagined. You've inspired me." Anna smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I wouldn't have made it without you, Dad. You believed in me when no one else did." He took her hand in his, squeezing it gently. "Remember, Anna, this isn't the end. You found your voice, and now that you've used it, you'll be unstoppable. There are so many people out there who need someone to stand up for them, to remind them that they matter." She nodded, feeling a sense of purpose settling within her. The battle she'd fought had ignited something inside her, a desire to continue standing up, not just for herself, but for others who might be facing similar struggles. She was beginning to see a future for herself, one where she could make a difference, one voice at a time. As the night grew darker, Anna felt a peace that went deeper than anything she'd known. She had faced her worst fears and emerged stronger, more sure of herself and her worth. The ordeal had changed her, but it had also made her resilient, confident in a way she hadn't been before. She felt ready to face whatever challenges came next. In the months that followed, Anna took on new roles at school. She joined the student council and began working with teachers and administrators on anti-bullying initiatives, helping to ensure that no other student would have to go through what she had. Her experience had made her a leader, and she found that others looked to her for guidance and support. Marcus watched with pride as his daughter grew into a strong, compassionate young woman, unafraid to stand up for what was right. Their journey had been difficult, painful, even frightening at times, but he knew that it had shaped her into someone extraordinary. One evening, as they walked through the neighborhood, Marcus turned to Anna with a thoughtful smile. "You know, Anna, you might have a future as a lawyer. You'd be great at it, just like your old man." Anna laughed, rolling her eyes. "Maybe, Dad. But if I do, you'll have to teach me everything you know." He chuckled, giving her a playful nudge. "Deal. But something tells me you'll be teaching me a thing or two as well." They walked in comfortable silence, both of them feeling a sense of closure. The battle with Caldwell was over, but the lessons they'd learned, the strength they'd gained, would stay with them forever. Together they had faced down a powerful adversary, standing up for what was right, and they'd emerged victorious. As they turned down the familiar street toward home, Anna felt a sense of clarity about her path forward. She wasn't sure where life would take her, but she knew one thing for certain: she would always have the courage to stand up for herself and others, to speak the truth, and to fight for justice. And with her father by her side, she felt ready for anything the world had to offer.